Pregnant Omega threw himself over the Alpha Mafia boss's son. The glass shattered on his back instead. Greyport City never slept. It only changed masks. By day, it pretended to be civilized, glass towers reflecting the sun, cafes filled with laughter, people walking fast with purpose in their eyes. By night, the city shed its lies. Neon lights flickered over rain-soaked streets. Sirens sang lullabies to criminals. Shadows grew teeth. This was the Greyport Omegas were born into. And Ilya Rowan had learned long ago that Omegas like him were not meant to take up space. He walked with his head down, shoulders hunched beneath an oversized charcoal coat that swallowed his slim frame. The coat was too big, intentionally so, layers of fabric hiding the gentle swell beneath his ribs. 3 months. Almost 4. The knowledge sat heavy in his chest, heavier than the ache in his lower back after 12-hour shifts. Ilya adjusted the scarf around his neck, fingers trembling slightly as a wave of nausea rolled through him. He paused near an alley, breathing slowly through his nose until the dizziness passed. Just a little longer, he told himself. Just survive a little longer. Being a mute Omega in Greyport meant invisibility was survival. Ilya had never spoken a word in his life, not because he couldn't think them, but because his voice had been taken from him as a child. In this city, silence was both curse and armor. Tonight the air smelled like rain and metal. His warehouse shift had ended late. He had taken the long way home to avoid the main streets, where alphas gathered in packs, drunk on power and scent. The baby stirred. Ilya froze, palm pressing instinctively to his stomach. The movement was faint, barely more than a flutter, but it stole his breath every time. "I'm here," he whispered silently, lips moving without sound. "I won't let anything happen to you." He wasn't sure if he believed it. A secret born in the rain. 3 months ago, Ilya hadn't even known the name Lucien Virelli. He only remembered rain. Heavy, cold rain pounding against concrete. The alley had been dark, illuminated only by a flickering street lamp. Ilya had been walking home when he saw a body collapsed near a dumpster, blood spreading beneath the man like ink. An alpha. Ilya should have run. Every instinct screamed danger. But then the man had groaned, low, pained, and Ilya's feet had moved on their own. The alpha had been beautiful, even half dead. Dark hair plastered to sharp cheekbones, lips pale, eyes burning with fever when they fluttered open. "Help," the man had rasped. Ilya had knelt beside him, hands shaking as he tore fabric to stop the bleeding. He hadn't known he was touching a Mafia heir, only that the alpha's scent was overwhelming, smoke, steel, and something broken beneath it. One night. A bond sparked in chaos, fueled by pain, rain, and desperation. Ilya had never meant for it to happen. He had never planned to keep anything from it. When the alpha disappeared before morning, Ilya thought that was the end. He had been wrong. An Omega carrying a death sentence. Now, Greyport hunted him without knowing his face. Whispers passed through the underworld, about a missing Omega, about a possible heir, about leverage worth killing for. Ilya caught fragments in the warehouse, overheard alphas laughing about rewards. His scent blockers barely worked anymore. Pregnancy made Omegas glow in ways the city noticed. Ilya avoided mirrors, avoided people, avoided hope. As he passed the corner cafe, a place he never entered because the glass walls made him feel exposed, voices rose suddenly. Loud. Angry. Alpha voices. Ilya's steps slowed. A black car idled by the curb, engine rumbling like a beast ready to strike. Men in suits stood too rigid, too alert. Mafia. His heart began to race. And then the door opened. Lucien Virelli stepped out. Time fractured. The world narrowed to one man standing beneath the cafe lights, tall and immaculately dressed, eyes sharp as knives. He looked untouched by the city, like he ruled it rather than survived it. But Ilya recognized him instantly. The scent hit first. Smoke. Steel. Rain. The alpha from the alley. The father of his child. Ilya stumbled back, pulse roaring in his ears. His throat tightened painfully, words rising that would never come. Lucien scanned the street, gaze passing over Ilya without recognition. He doesn't know. Relief and heartbreak tangled together in Ilya's chest. He turned to leave. That was when shouting erupted. A gun was drawn. Glass reflected a flash of movement, and the world rushed toward disaster. The first gunshot did not sound like thunder. It sounded like the world cracking open. For half a second, no one reacted. The cafe's glass walls reflected stunned faces, mouths frozen mid-scream, coffee cups suspended between tables and lips. Lucien Virelli's men moved first, hands snapping to holsters, bodies forming instinctive shields. Lucien turned sharply. His alpha senses screamed. Threat. Distance, close. Intent, kill. Across the street, a man stood half-hidden behind a parked car, arm extended. The muzzle flash bloomed like a dying star. And in the space between heartbeat and breath, Ilya ran. Ilya, instinct over reason. He didn't think. Thinking would have killed Lucien. Ilya's feet slammed against wet pavement as he surged forward, coat flying open despite his effort to keep it closed. The world shrank to the alpha standing frozen in shock, to the bullet screaming toward him. Ilya knew one thing with terrifying clarity. If Lucien dies, my child dies with him. The scent of gunpowder tore through the air. Ilya threw himself forward, arms outstretched. Not toward the gun. Toward Lucien. Lucien, the scent that shouldn't exist. Lucien registered movement too late. A blur of fabric. A scent that made his blood roar. Omega. Pregnant. What? His body reacted before his mind caught up. He reached out, but not fast enough. The bullet missed them both. But the cafe didn't. The glass shattered on his back instead. The glass wall exploded. Not cracked. Exploded. Thousands of shards burst outward as if the building itself had been shot. They screamed through the air, catching the street lights, glittering beautifully for a single horrifying moment. Then they fell. Ilya hit Lucien full force, knocking the alpha back a step. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Lucien felt it, the lightness of Ilya's body, the fragility of it, the way it curled instinctively to shield him. Then the glass struck. Shard after shard tore into Ilya's exposed back. Flesh split. Blood sprayed warm and bright against Lucien's hands, his suit, the pavement. Some pieces embedded deep, others sliced long, cruel lines across pale skin. Ilya's body convulsed. But not a sound escaped him. No scream. No cry. Just a sharp, broken inhale, and then silence. Lucien caught him as his legs buckled. Lucien, panic in the Alpha King. Lucien had been shot before. He had stabbed men with his own hands. He had watched blood pool on marble floors without blinking. But the sight of the Omega bleeding in his arms shattered something primal inside him. No, 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 Lucien snarled, voice cracking as he dropped to his knees, pulling Ilya closer. His hands trembled as he tried to shield the Omega's back, but everywhere he touched was slick with blood. The scent hit him fully then. Omega. Pregnancy. Fading. Lucien roared. Medic, he shouted. Now. His men moved in a blur, returning fire, dragging civilians away, forming a protective wall around them. Sirens wailed in the distance. Lucien didn't hear any of it. He could only feel the way Ilya's body shook weakly against his chest. Ilya, fading through pain. Pain was everywhere. It burned like fire across his back, sharp and endless. His fingers clenched in Lucien's jacket, fabric slick with his blood. The baby. Panic clawed through him harder than the pain. Ilya tried to move his hands, to sign, to write, to explain, but his arms wouldn't obey. Darkness crept in at the edges of his vision. Lucien's face hovered above him, eyes wild, lips moving. Ilya didn't hear the words, but he recognized the expression. Fear. For the first time, the Alpha who ruled Greyport was afraid. Ilya smiled faintly. Good, he thought weakly. Now he knows what it feels like. His hand slipped from Lucien's coat. The truth revealed and sent. The medic arrived, swearing under his breath as he knelt beside them. He's losing blood fast, the medic said. Alpha, move. Lucien refused. Careful, the medic snapped. He's pregnant. The word slammed into the air like a gunshot. Lucien froze. Pregnant. The world tilted. Lucien's gaze dropped to Ilya's stomach, just barely rounded beneath the torn coat. Memory flooded back. The night in the rain. The bond he'd severed. The Omega who vanished without a trace. Oh gods, Lucien whispered. The Omega in his arms was him. Fight to the hospital. They loaded Ilya onto a stretcher. Lucien climbed in after him, ignoring his men's protests. He held Ilya's hand the entire ride, knuckles white, voice low and furious as he spoke to the medic. Save them, he ordered. Both of them. Ilya drifted in and out, sensing warmth, pressure, the steady presence beside him. Lucien leaned close, voice rough. Stay with me. You hear me? Don't you dare disappear again. Ilya wanted to answer. He couldn't. The ambulance lights washed the world in red and white. And somewhere between consciousness and darkness, the bond, long denied, tightened its grip. Lucien's vow. As the hospital came into view, Lucien pressed his forehead to Ilya's blood-soaked hair. I don't know who you are, he whispered, voice breaking. I don't know why you did this. His grip tightened. But if you live, if they live. Lucien's eyes burned with lethal promise. I will burn the city down for you. Hospitals were supposed to be sterile, clean, controlled, predictable. But to Lucien Virelli, the emergency wing of Greyport Central felt like a battlefield after the smoke had cleared, bright lights glaring down like interrogators, floors stained with echoes of blood, air thick with antiseptic and fear. The doors to the operating room slammed shut. Ilya Rowan was on the other side of them. Lucien stood frozen, his hands still sticky with blood that wasn't his. Dark red stains soaked into the sleeves of his tailored suit, proof of something he couldn't undo. Every second that passed scraped raw against his nerves. The doctor's words replayed in his head like a curse. Severe lacerations. Significant blood loss. Omega. Pregnant. Lucien dragged a hand through his hair and exhaled sharply, chest tight, lungs refusing to work properly. Pregnant. He pressed his palm hard against his sternum, as if trying to crush the panic clawing its way out. What? The alpha who waited. Lucien had never waited for anything in his life. People waited for him, to speak, to decide, to kill, to spare. Now he paced the narrow hallway like a caged animal, every step echoing too loud. His men stood at a distance, silent, faces grim. None of them dared speak, because none of them had ever seen Lucien Virelli like this. He stopped abruptly and stared at the closed doors again. Why did you run? Why didn't you hide? Why did you throw yourself in front of me? The questions burned unanswered. Lucien remembered the weight of Ilya's body slamming into him. The way the Omega had curled instinctively, not to protect himself but to protect Lucien. It made no sense. Omegas didn't do that. Not in Greyport. Not for alphas like him. His jaw tightened. Unless guilt cuts deeper than glass. Memory crept in like poison. Rain. Blood. An alley that stank of rot and desperation. Lucien remembered waking to gentle hands pressing against his wound, remembered a soft presence kneeling in the dark. He remembered the Omega's eyes, wide, cautious, impossibly kind for someone who owed him nothing. He remembered the bond flaring. And the fear. Lucien had severed it before dawn, cold and clean, telling himself it was mercy. Telling himself an Omega tied to him would die faster than alone. I did this, he realized hollowly. If he hadn't walked away. If he hadn't chosen power over responsibility. If he hadn't pretended the night never happened. Ilya wouldn't have been alone. Wouldn't have been hunted. Wouldn't have bled for him. Lucien slammed his fist into the wall. The sound cracked through the hallway. One of his men flinched. Lucien didn't notice. Inside the operating room. Machines beeped in sharp, merciless rhythms. Ilya lay motionless beneath surgical lights, skin pale, lashes dark against hollowed cheeks. Blood had been cleaned away but the damage remained, deep cuts, embedded glass, trauma layered over fragile Omega physiology. The doctor worked fast. Careful, she warned. The fetus is under stress. Ilya's body twitched faintly as glass was removed piece by piece. His fingers curled weakly as if reaching for something that wasn't there. Lucien. He drifted in and out, pain dragging him under again and again. In the haze he remembered the alley. The rain. The alpha's face when the glass fell. Fear. Real fear. Ilya clung to that memory like a lifeline. The verdict. Hours later, though it felt like years, the doors finally opened. Lucien straightened instantly. The doctor removed her mask, exhaustion lining her face. He's alive, she said first. Lucien's knees nearly buckled. And the baby? She studied him carefully. Alive. But this Omega pushed his body far past its limits. The next few days are critical. Lucien swallowed hard. Can I see him? The doctor hesitated. Briefly. He's fragile. Emotionally and physically. Lucien nodded. Fragile. The word hurt more than any threat ever had. Ilya wakes. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Ilya surfaced slowly, pain blooming everywhere at once. His back burned, wrapped tightly in bandages. Tubes trailed from his arms. His throat felt dry, aching with words he could never speak. He turned his head slightly. And froze. Lucien sat beside the bed. Not looming. Not cold. Just there. His suit jacket was gone. His shirt sleeves rolled up. Blood still stained the cuffs. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He looked broken. Their eyes met. Ilya's heart stuttered. Why is he here? He tried to move, panic rising. But Lucien reacted instantly, placing a gentle hand on the mattress near Ilya's fingers. He didn't touch him directly. I won't hurt you, Lucien said quietly. You're safe. Safe. Ilya blinked, tears spilling without warning. He lifted his trembling hand and made a clumsy apologetic gesture, fingers shaking as he tried to sign. Sorry. Lucien frowned. No. His voice cracked. No, he repeated firmer. You don't apologize. Not for this. Ilya looked away ashamed. Lucien leaned forward slightly. I'm sorry. The words fell heavy. Ilya's eyes widened. Alphas like Lucien didn't apologize. Especially not to Omegas. Guilt spoken aloud. I should have found you, Lucien continued, voice low and raw. I should have stayed. I should never have let you face this alone. Ilya's breath hitched. Lucien looked at him like he was afraid. Afraid to say the wrong thing, afraid to shatter him again. You saved my life, Lucien said. And you didn't even hesitate. He lowered his head. I don't deserve that. Ilya reached weakly for the pen on the bedside table, fingers clumsy. He wrote slowly, letters uneven. I chose. Lucien stared at the words. No, he whispered. I forced that choice on you. Silence pressed in, thick and heavy. Outside machines hummed. Life continued. But in that small hospital room, something fragile and real began to take shape. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But truth. A promise made in fear. Lucien stood abruptly, turning away to compose himself. I don't know what you want, he said, voice tight. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. He faced Ilya again, eyes burning. But I swear this to you. No one touches you. No one touches our child. Not my father. Not the Mafia. Not this city. His voice dropped to a vow. I will carry the guilt. You don't have to anymore. Ilya watched him silently, tears sliding into his hair. For the first time since the rain-soaked alley, he wasn't alone. Power did not walk loudly. It didn't need to. When Don Marco Virelli arrived at Greyport Central Hospital, the entire building seemed to shrink around him. Doctors stiffened. Nurses lowered their gazes. Security straightened without knowing why. Even Lucien's men, trained killers loyal to the bone, felt the pressure coil in their chests like a warning. The Don did not bring weapons. He brought authority. Lucien sensed him before he saw him. The familiar chill crept up his spine, a childhood reflex that had never truly faded. He turned slowly from the window of Ilya's hospital room just as the doors slid open. Don Marco Virelli entered with 2 quiet steps. Silver hair slicked back. Tailored black coat. Eyes sharp and calculating, like a man who had buried sons without blinking and slept well afterward. His gaze flicked once, to the bed, to the Omega lying pale and bandaged, to the faint rise and fall of a pregnant stomach. Then back to Lucien. So, the Don said calmly, this is the problem. Lucien's jaw tightened. He's not a problem, Lucien replied. The Don's eyes hardened a fraction. An Omega is a weakness. Don Marco approached the bed, hands clasped behind his back. He studied Ilya the way one examined an exposed nerve, without pity, only interest. A mute Omega, the Don murmured. Unmarked. Unclaimed. Carrying your child. Lucien stepped forward instantly, placing himself between them. Don't, he warned. The Don smiled faintly. You forget yourself, Lucien? No, Lucien said, voice low. I remember exactly who I am. Silence stretched. The Don turned away at last. You know what this means. The other family's already suspect. If they confirm an heir exists, especially one carried by an unprotected Omega, they will come. They already did, Lucien snapped. That's why he's bleeding. The Don's gaze sharpened. And he will bleed again, the Don replied coolly, if he remains. Lucien's fists clenched. The solution no one wanted. The child is leverage, the Don continued. And the Omega is the handle. Lucien stared at him. Say what you actually mean. The Don did not hesitate. The Omega must disappear. Lucien felt something inside him snap. Absolutely not. Don Marco's voice hardened. You will listen. I will not, Lucien growled. Not this time. The Don turned fully toward him now, eyes blazing with authority forged in blood. You are the heir to this empire, the Don said. You do not get to choose love over survival. Lucien stepped closer, towering over his father. And you do not get to choose who I sacrifice. For the first time in years the Don looked surprised. Walls have ears. Outside the room, whispers spread like wildfire. The Don is here. The Omega lives. There's a child. Phones buzzed. Messages were sent. Eyes watched. Lucien knew it. He could feel the city turning its attention toward one fragile hospital room. This building is compromised, Lucien said. He needs to be moved. Agreed, the Don said. To a place I control. Lucien shook his head slowly. To a place I control. The air turned dangerous. Ilya overhears the truth. Inside the room Ilya lay still. But he was not asleep. He heard everything. Not the words clearly, but the tension, the tone, the way Lucien's voice sharpened when danger entered the room. He knew that voice. It was the sound of someone standing on the edge of a cliff. Ilya's fingers curled weakly against the sheets. I'm the reason, he thought. The reason Lucien would be torn apart by his own blood. The Don pushes harder. You are thinking with your bond, Don Marco said quietly. That makes you predictable. Lucien laughed without humor. No. I'm thinking like a king. The Don's expression darkened. Kings do not kneel for omegas. Lucien's eyes burned. Then maybe that's why your empire is rotting. A sharp intake of breath echoed from the guards. No one spoke to the Don like that. Ever. The Don stared at Lucien for a long moment. Then he said softly, dangerously, if you protect him, you declare him Virelli property. Lucien didn't hesitate. Good, he said. Then let them come. A line crossed. Don Marco turned toward the door. This city will test you, he said. Your sentiment will cost lives. He paused, not looking back. If you fail, I will clean up your mistake myself. The doors closed behind him. Lucien stood motionless for several seconds, chest rising and falling. Then he turned back to Ilya. The choice made. Ilya's eyes were open. Lucien crossed the room immediately, lowering himself beside the bed. You heard, Lucien said softly. Ilya nodded faintly, tears gathering. Lucien cupped the side of the bed, not touching him, but close enough that Ilya could feel the heat of him. I won't let him take you, Lucien said. Or the baby. Ilya reached for the pen again, hands shaking. They will kill you. Lucien smiled, sharp, fearless, deadly. Then they'll learn what happens when they try. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a vow meant only for them. I choose you. Outside the hospital, Greyport's underworld shifted. Because for the first time in decades, a Virelli chose love over power. And the Mafia would never forgive it. The safe house did not exist on any map. It sat at the edge of Greyport's old industrial district, disguised as an abandoned warehouse. Rusted metal walls, broken signage, windows painted black from the inside. To anyone passing by, it was another corpse left behind by a dying city. To Lucien Virelli, it was the last place in Greyport that still felt breathable. Ilya had been moved there before dawn. Wrapped in blankets, monitored by private doctors, guarded by men who would die before letting anyone through the door. And still, Lucien did not sleep. A city that never stops hunting. Night settled thick and heavy. Lucien stood near the reinforced window, watching rain streak down the glass. His men rotated shifts quietly. Weapons were checked. Locks tested. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and omega suppressant. Too quiet. Lucien trusted silence less than gunfire. Behind him, Ilya lay on the bed in the converted upstairs room. The lights were dimmed, but Lucien could sense him, fragile, aching, alive. Pregnancy made omegas vulnerable. But it also made bonds louder. Lucien felt every spike of Ilya's fear like it was wired directly into his spine. He turned. Ilya was awake. Fear without words. Ilya's eyes tracked him from the bed. Shadows carved hollows beneath them. His back was still heavily bandaged, movements careful, measured. Lucien crossed the room and stopped beside the bed. Pain? He asked quietly. Ilya shook his head. Then hesitated. Slowly, he lifted one hand and placed it over his stomach. Lucien's breath caught. You're worried about the baby, Lucien said. Ilya nodded. Lucien sat on the floor beside the bed, lower than him, unarmed, deliberately non-threatening. They're alive, Lucien said firmly. Both of you. Ilya watched him closely. Trust was still something borrowed, not owned. Lucien closed his eyes briefly. I know you don't believe me yet, but I will not fail you again. Ilya's fingers trembled. Then, hesitantly, they reached down, brushing Lucien's sleeve. The contact was light, but the bond surged like fire. The first shot. The explosion shattered the night. Not inside the safe house. Outside. The shockwave rattled the walls, lights flickering violently. Alarms screamed to life. Lucien was on his feet instantly, hand flying to his gun. Contact, someone shouted over comms. Perimeter breach, south side. Ilya gasped, panic flaring sharp and bright. Lucien turned to him immediately. Hide, Lucien ordered, already moving. Bathroom. Lock it. Don't come out unless it's me. Ilya shook his head frantically. Lucien crouched in front of him, gripping the bed frame hard enough to steady himself. "Listen to me," Lucien said, voice deadly calm. "They are here for you. That means I will be louder than you. Faster than you. Do you understand?" Ilia swallowed and nodded. Lucien squeezed his hand once. Then the gunfire reached the building. Assassins in the dark. Windows blew inward. Glass rained down, again. Lucien's men returned fire, the warehouse erupting into chaos. Smoke filled the lower level. The scent of blood and metal burned the air. Lucien moved like a predator, barking orders, firing with lethal precision. Protect the stairs. Fall back to the inner corridor. He killed 2 men before they reached the main door. Then he heard it. A sharp, broken sound upstairs. Ilya. Lucien's heart slammed violently. They found him. The assassins hadn't come for Lucien. They came with silencers. With syringes. With orders. Ilya stumbled backward as the bathroom door burst inward. A masked man lunged for him, grabbing his arm too hard. Ilya screamed. No sound came out. But the Bond screamed instead. Lucien felt it like a blade through his chest. Lucien chooses violence. Lucien reached the stairs just as the assassin dragged Ilya into the hallway. Time slowed. Ilya struggled weakly, one hand clutching his stomach protectively, eyes wide with terror. Lucien didn't shout. He fired. The bullet took the man through the skull. Ilya collapsed, shaking violently. Lucien dropped beside him instantly, wrapping his body around Ilya's, shielding him from everything: gunfire, glass, death. "I've got you," Lucien rasped. "I've got you." More footsteps thundered. Lucien rose like a demon. No mercy. No hesitation. When the last body hit the floor, the safe house was soaked in blood and silence. Aftermath. Ilya clung to Lucien, trembling so badly his teeth chattered. Blood, not his, splattered his clothes. Lucien cupped his face carefully, forehead pressed to his. "They didn't touch you," Lucien whispered. "They didn't hurt you." Ilya shook his head, tears streaming freely now. Lucien pulled him into his chest. The bond snapped tight. Not denial. Not fear. Acceptance. A bond forged in fire. Later, as medics checked Ilya again and guards dragged bodies away, Lucien stayed seated on the floor beside the bed. He did not leave. He did not sleep. Ilya rested with his head against Lucien's shoulder. For the first time, he did not flinch at the Alpha's presence. Outside, the Mafia would regroup. They would strike again. But inside the safe house, something had changed. This was no longer an Omega hiding behind an Alpha. This was a family standing together. And anyone who tried to take them would die. The underworld gathered because blood had been spilled. That was the rule of Greyport. When 3 rival families lost men in one night, and none of them could explain how, every syndicate head knew the Virelli family would call council. The meeting was set in Sanctum Hall. No weapons drawn. No violence permitted. Only power. Lucien arrived late. Deliberately. The king walks in. The doors opened without announcement. Conversation died instantly. Lucien Virelli stepped into the hall dressed in black. No insignia, no family crest, no concessions. His presence alone silenced the room. Alpha straightened. Beta swallowed. Even rival dons felt the shift in the air. Lucien did not look at them. He walked straight to the head of the table, where Don Marco Virelli already sat. Father and son locked eyes. The resemblance was undeniable. Same sharp bone structure, same steel-deep gaze. But where the Don's authority was cold and ancient, Lucien's burned hot and dangerous. "You're late," the Don said evenly. Lucien replied just as calmly. "I was burying men who tried to kill my family." A murmur rippled through the hall. Family. Don Marco's eyes narrowed. The accusation. "This council convenes because violence broke protocol," the Don announced. Virelli blood was spilled. Lucien leaned forward, hands flat on the table. "Yes," he said. "By your allies." The room erupted. Shouts. Protests. Denials. Lucien didn't raise his voice. "I have proof," he continued. "Names. Orders. Payment trails." He slid a data pad across the table. One by one, syndicate heads paled as their secrets were exposed. Assassination contracts. Target, pregnant Omega. Collateral, acceptable. Silence fell like a blade. Don Virelli strikes back. "You endangered the balance," Don Marco said coldly. "You slaughtered men without council approval." Lucien smiled slowly. "They came into my home," he replied. "They tried to rip my child out of my Omega." Gasps echoed. Don Marco slammed his cane against the floor. "Enough." He stood. You speak of weakness like it is virtue, the Don said, voice carrying effortlessly. An Omega is not a family. He is exposure. Lucien rose as well. No, Lucien said quietly. He is my mate. The word hit harder than any gunshot. Mate. Bonded. Chosen. The public declaration. Lucien turned, not to his father but to the room. Ilya Rowan is under my protection, he declared. The child he carries is Virelli blood. He let his gaze sweep the hall. Any attack on them is an attack on me. The Don laughed sharply. You would burn an empire for a silent Omega? Lucien met his father's eyes without blinking. I already am. The breaking point. You forget who built this empire, Don Marco said, voice dropping into something lethal. Everything you are, everything you command, is mine. Lucien took one step forward. Then take it back, he said. Because I won't give them up. A stunned hush followed. This was no longer politics. This was exile or war. The Don stared at his son for a long, terrible moment. Then he said slowly, if you continue you will no longer be my heir. Lucien didn't hesitate. Then I'll be something better. Choosing sides. One by one chairs scraped back. Not everyone but enough. Old captains. Trusted lieutenants. Even a rival Don inclined his head slightly. The power in the room shifted. Don Marco felt it. His jaw tightened. You would fracture the family, he accused. Lucien replied, voice iron solid, you already did. The fall of a king. Silence stretched. Then Don Marco exhaled, long, controlled. Very well, he said. If you insist on carrying this burden. He lifted his cane and placed it on the table. I retire. Shock tore through the hall. Lucien froze. Don Marco straightened, eyes sharp but tired. You wanted the throne, the Don said. Now you'll bleed for it. He turned and walked out. Just like that. Aftermath. Lucien remained standing long after the doors closed. The underworld watched him with new eyes. Not as an heir. But as a ruler. Back at the safe house. Ilya felt it before Lucien returned. The bond pulsed, heavy, resolute, exhausted. When Lucien entered the room, Ilya looked up anxiously. Lucien crossed the space in 3 strides and knelt in front of him. It's done, Lucien said. Ilya searched his face. Lucien took his hand and placed it over his heart. I chose you, he repeated softly. In front of everyone. Tears slid silently down Ilya's cheeks. For the first time. The Omega wasn't hiding. And the Alpha wasn't running. Violence had always been loud. Healing was not. It came quietly, measured in shallow breaths, slow footsteps, and the careful way Lucien learned to move around Ilya's pain. Scars that do not fade. Morning light filtered through the reinforced windows of the new residence. No longer a safe house, but a home hidden in plain sight beyond Greyport's reach. The city felt distant here, muffled, like something left behind. Ilya stood before the mirror. His back was a landscape of scars. Long, pale lines traced where glass had torn into him. Some were jagged, others thin and sharp as whispers. They would fade, the doctor said, but never disappear. Ilya lifted his hands slowly, fingers hovering over the worst of them. He did not hate them. They were proof that he had survived, that his child had survived, that he had chosen love in a world that punished it. Behind him, Lucien watched silently. Lucien learns to be gentle. Lucien did not touch the scars at first. He had learned restraint the hard way. Instead, he waited until Ilya turned, until their eyes met, until the Omega nodded faintly. Only then did Lucien step closer. His fingers traced the scars with reverence, not possession, like he was reading a history written into flesh. I'm sorry, Lucien said quietly. For every one of these. Ilya shook his head. Slowly, he took Lucien's hand and pressed it flat against his back, grounding, forgiving without words. Lucien exhaled shakily. This was the intimacy that terrified him most. Not bodies. But trust. The bond chosen. The bond no longer pulsed painfully. It rested warm and steady, like a second heartbeat shared between them. Lucien had stopped fighting it. He woke when Ilya stirred. He calmed when the Omega was anxious. He felt the baby's presence like a quiet promise. At night, Lucien slept on the edge of the bed, never fully resting until Ilya reached for him in his sleep, small, unconscious movements that anchored them both. One night, Ilya woke from a nightmare, breath hitching soundlessly. Lucien was there instantly. He pulled Ilya into his chest, one arm wrapped protectively around his back, the other resting over his stomach. I'm here, Lucien murmured. I won't leave. Ilya pressed his forehead to Lucien's collarbone. and for the first time, he believed it. Don Marco Virelli, POV. Exile was quieter than Don Marco expected. No gunfire. No shouting. No throne to haunt him. Just a private estate overlooking the sea and the relentless sound of waves reminding him of time passing without permission. The Don stood alone on the terrace, cane resting against his leg. Lucien had not come. He hadn't expected him to. Power was easier to abandon than pride. A king without a throne. Don Marco had ruled with precision. No weakness. No sentiment. No mercy where it endangered the family. That was what he had taught Lucien. And Lucien had listened, until he hadn't. The Don clenched his jaw. I made him strong, he thought. I made him ruthless. But he had not made him happy. The realization settled heavy in his chest. The Omega. The Don had seen the Omega's eyes in the hospital. Not fearful. Not scheming. Resolute. That unsettled him more than any threat ever had. An Omega who threw himself into glass for another man was not leverage. He was devotion. And devotion was something the Don had never learned to control. Legacy is not blood alone. Don Marco looked out at the horizon. He remembered his own mate, long dead, gentle in ways he had not protected enough. He had chosen empire over family once. Lucien had chosen differently. Perhaps that was the truer strength. He will outgrow me, the Don murmured to the empty air. And perhaps that was the point of legacy. Quiet love. Back at the estate, Lucien knelt beside Ilia, helping him tie his shoes because bending was still difficult. Their movements were practiced now, unspoken. Lucien pressed a kiss to Ilya's knuckles, soft, reverent. Not claiming. Honoring. Ilya smiled faintly, eyes warm. He reached for the notepad and wrote slowly. I'm not afraid anymore. Lucien swallowed hard. Neither am I, he replied. Outside, the world still held danger. But inside, they were building something that could not be shattered. Not by glass. Not by power. Not by fear. Don Marco, final thought. Far away, Don Marco Virelli closed a letter he would never send. Take care of what I could not. The sea answered with silence. And somewhere in Greyport, a child kicked softly beneath an Omega's heart. Proof that legacy did not end. It evolved. The night the child decided to be born, Greyport was silent. No sirens. No gunfire. No shouting. Just rain tapping softly against reinforced windows and the steady hum of a city that no longer hunted them. Lucien woke instantly. The bond flared, not with fear but with urgency. Purpose. He turned to Ilya just as the Omega sucked in a sharp breath, fingers clutching the sheets, eyes wide. Lucien was already moving. It's time, he said softly, reverently. Ilya nodded, terror and wonder colliding in his gaze. The longest night. The private medical wing had been prepared weeks in advance. Doctors arrived quietly. Lights were kept low. The air smelled clean and calm, deliberately unlike a hospital. Lucien never left Ilya's side. He knelt by the bed, holding Ilya's hand through every contraction, grounding him with whispered reassurances even when his own heart threatened to break out of his chest. You're doing perfectly, Lucien murmured. I'm here. I won't let go. Ilya's pain was immense but not lonely. He clung to Lucien like an anchor, trusting him with every breath. When fear threatened to overwhelm him, Lucien pressed his forehead to Ilya's, sharing breath, sharing strength. The scars on Ilya's back burned, but they did not break him. They never would again. Don Marco Virelli, a redemption at a distance. Far from Greyport, Don Marco woke with a sudden, aching awareness. The bond he shared with Lucien, long strained, nearly severed, shifted subtly. A new presence entered the world. The Don sat up slowly, heart heavy. So, he murmured, staring at the darkened horizon. You arrived. He did not order champagne. He did not summon men. Instead he sat quietly. And waited. The cry that changed everything. The moment came like a breaking wave. One final push. One final cry of effort, soundless but fierce. Then, a cry filled the room. Strong. Alive. Unapologetic. Lucien froze. Tears streamed down his face as the doctor lifted the baby, small, red-faced, furious at the world. A healthy alpha, the doctor announced warmly. Lucien laughed brokenly. An alpha. With Omega eyes. They placed the child against Ilya's chest. Ilya sobbed openly now, clutching the baby protectively, trembling with relief and overwhelming love. Lucien pressed a trembling hand over both of them. My heart, he whispered. Both of you. A name finally spoken. Later, when the room had emptied and dawn painted the walls gold, Lucien sat beside the bed, their child sleeping between them. Ilya reached for the notepad with weak fingers. Lucien helped steady it. Ilya wrote slowly, deliberately. Elian. Lucien swallowed hard. Elian Virelli, he repeated softly. The bond hummed with quiet joy. The Don's letter. Days later a letter arrived. No seal. No threats. No commands. Lucien opened it alone. I once believed legacy was built by fear. You have proven it can be built by love. Protect them better than I protected you. Lucien folded the letter carefully. He did not respond. He didn't need to. The future chosen. Weeks passed. Ilya healed slowly, surely. Lucien learned how to cradle a newborn without fear, how to smile softly instead of sharply, how to rule without cruelty. The world adjusted. Greyport whispered. But no one came. Because some lines, once drawn, were respected. Glass does not shatter here. One afternoon they returned to the cafe. The glass walls had been replaced. Thicker, reinforced, unbreakable. Ilya stood inside, holding Elian close. Lucien watched them from a few steps away. Sunlight spilled through the windows. No fear. No gunfire. No shattered glass. Lucien joined them, resting his hand over Ilya's and the baby's. This is where it began, Lucien said quietly. Ilya nodded. And then he smiled. Not fragile. Not afraid. But whole. Epilogue moment. That night, as Elian slept between them, Lucien pressed a kiss to Ilya's scars. Not as apology. But as honor. You saved me, Lucien murmured. Ilya traced a finger over Lucien's heart. We saved each other. Outside, Greyport breathed. Inside, the world was finally peaceful.